Hey everyone, this is Dan. In this video, we're going to make some generative art, sort of hard-edged watercolor paintings. What we're going to do is we're going to draw the images in p5.js. We're going to plot them using the Cameo, and then we're going to come in after they've been plotted and we'll do some watercolor over the top. They ended up looking pretty cool. I have a few of them here. We'll just kind of scroll through them. There were 4 in total. Move my hand. There's another. Third. And I think this guy was my favorite. Number 4. But we'll take a look at them. It was a fun project, and we'll head over to the text editor and get started. And by the way, if you don't want to watch the code part of the video, what you can do is skip ahead. I'll put some sort of a time note in the video description, and hopefully some kind of scroll ahead. What happened is the other day I was sitting around and I decided to do some work with random walkers in p5.js. And basically a random walker, if you don't know, is you draw a point, and then it moves to another point, and then it moves to another point, and it moves to another point, and you can end up drawing some type of a line or a curve or whatever you want. But what happened is, before I even got to the random walker, I got sidetracked and started messing around with these Bezier curves, and ended up with kind of an interesting result. And what I want to do is take this image, export it as an SVG, plot it with the Cameo, and then do a little bit of watercolor. And that'll make sense here when you see the end image and what we're aiming for. But where we're going to start is kind of inside of p5.js. We're looking at Bezier, and I just want to give a little bit of background on how this works so you can understand what happens. Effectively, with the Bezier curve, you have 2 points. You choose 2 points, and then you choose 2 control points, and that's like these lines, right? And effectively, as you move these lines, it changes the shape of the curve. So you can end up with kind of an interesting curve depending on how you manipulate the control points, which twist the curve, or choose the points themselves. And this is kind of where this started. And the direction that we're going to go in and what we end up with is this. All right. And so you can see that I have a couple of points here. This is this one line in particular here, for example. So I choose a point here, I choose a point here, then I twist the line using some control points. And the way that I'm doing that in the code here is using some randomness, and I'm choosing sort of a centralized point here to kind of bring everything back to roughly a central starting place. And then I'm using some different colors with a little bit of, a lower alpha. And I think that this kind of mimics that watercolor look. And so it'll be interesting to see how this comes out in real life on paper as opposed to just on the machine. So what I've done here is I've kind of leveraged the way the p5.js works, and what happens is it draws, repeat draws frames every second, right? And so what I'm doing is I'm looping through, letting it draw a certain number of frames, and then I'm telling it to stop. And this points value here it's effectively my counter. It's not really points, it's actually shapes or lines or curves or whatever you want to call it, but we'll call it points for now. Control offset, this is an input that I'm using to choose where I draw my control handles. Stop, this is just how many lines I want to draw, in this case 13. So we have, if you were to go through and count these, you would find that there are 13 lines down here. And then this is a set of RGBA colors that I'm passing into this array. And so I have a low alpha value on it, 0.3, and that gives it that little bit of opacity to mimic the watercolor effect that we're going to try to experiment with. What I've done here, create canvas, 450 by 600. I'm not being super precise. This is, I have a sheet of watercolor paper. And when I cut it down, it ends up being about 4.5 inches by 6 inches. So that's the size we're going to go for. And this is kind of like an experiment or a sketch or something. And so we're just going to see how it turns out. Random seed I'm using just to save the value. So when I export it, I know roughly what I'm going to get. And that's everything that's taking place inside of the setup function. When we come down into draw, stroke 20, I'm just drawing a black line, more or less. No fill and fill. So when I export this to SVG, we're actually going to want to turn off the fill, and we can do that now. So what's kind of notable is that when you turn off the fill, the lines redraw themselves, and so even though we're using a random seed of 15, the lines are in a different location now than they were a minute ago. So when we're choosing something to export, we're actually going to choose it with the fill off. So maybe I'll leave that off for now, and we'll see how it shakes out. What I'm doing to start is I'm just choosing an X1, X, and Y1. This is just my first point. My X1 I'm choosing somewhere in the width of the paper, and the Y1 I'm choosing somewhere in the height of the paper. Okay. For X2, Y2, I'm doing the same thing, right? And so I have 2 points effectively that are just randomly chosen somewhere inside of the document here, and it's drawing a curve in between those. What I'm doing that's a little bit different then is I'm choosing control points that are offset by that fixed value. So again, control offset defined at the top is 150 pixels. And so I'm taking that starting point and I'm just saying plus minus 150 from there. And then, the same thing for Y value, choose that Y value and then do plus minus from there. And you can see here, I go outside of the canvas a little bit. This isn't ultra precise, and I'm fine with that. We'll just clean it up when we export the image to SVG and take it to the Cameo. But then when you have that, all we're doing is drawing the curve. So we have our first X point and Y point, and then we have our control points. So this right here is really point 1 on the Bezier curve with the control points. And this here is point 2 with the control points. So X2, Y2, CX2, CY2. I increment my counter. And again, this is not really points. This is the number of lines. I guess we could call it lines, but we'll just call it points because it's already being called that. And then when points gets greater than the number I want to draw, in this case 13, you can see my stop is 13. I just call no loop, and then that stops the canvas from drawing. So to take it from here to SVG, what we want to do is, to start, we just want to choose some variations that we like. And what I like to do is just go in here. We'll start with, variation 1. That's kind of interesting. Let's just sort of iterate through. I don't have numbers in mind, or I haven't chosen numbers, so. Before we keep going, I want to just talk about something a little bit different. So in this case, we're using Bezier to draw the curve, right? We're choosing an X, Y, and then the control points, and then a second X, Y, and control points. In p5.js, there's also this notion of a curve vertex. And the curve vertex kind of, I guess, draws the curve for you. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but effectively you choose just point values. And so I have another variation of this sketch that's using curve vertex. Yeah. So what this is doing is it's kind of the same thing. It's drawing a number of different curves, but it's actually closing the curve. And so you end up with kind of cool versions. Like this is one of these, and it's almost like some sort of organic stained glass type of thing. And I kind of like this as well. So I'm going to export a couple of these also, and then we'll decide what we want to plot out and then use with the watercolor sketching. And again, I didn't resize this when I was inside of the p5.js. I just sort of exported it. So I do know that I'm going to have a little bit here of just weird sizing kind of stuff, and I'm totally okay with that. So we have our paper loaded. The Cameo is all set up. I have the 4 different layers here. We could have flattened these out into one layer, but we didn't do that. It's not a big deal. We're set on the pen holder with sketch and a force of 13. And the Cameo is connected, so we can go ahead and just click send. All right, we'll unload this. So this is kind of funny. The cutting mat was pushing up against the canvas that I had sitting behind the plotter as I was plotting that. And it looks like it didn't really make too much of a difference. The other thing is I had maybe a little bit too much contact paper on this, and my paper wasn't sticking to the cut mat. It was actually removing itself as the plotting was happening. But I think it still ended up looking relatively okay. And for what we're doing, I don't think it's going to make a difference or matter. So now we're ready to get started with the watercolor, and I'm not sure, again, exactly how this is going to turn out, but we're just going to give it a try. I do have some just plain scotch tape, and I'm going to use that a little bit on this image to kind of tape off some of the hard lines. On this one, I'm just going to go freehand, and what we're going to do with the watercolor is we'll start light and move it darker as we go through. I did a little bit of experimenting with the colors I might want to use, and so we have a little bit of like a yellow here, some sort of reddish pink, and becomes sort of orange, and then a purple, and then a teal type of color. And we'll just try to recreate those a little bit. I have some old paint in the pans here, and it also looks like I have a cat hair there. But I have two brushes. I have a Filbert brush, and then I also have this, I'm not even sure what it's called, brush, but I'll start with this because I can get a little bit finer line. And I'm gonna start in yellow because that's kind of our lightest color, and then we'll move darker from there. I think this is kind of interesting looking. I definitely like the effect of the watercolor with the pen. And it's over here, what happened is the watercolor kind of bled underneath my tape and it got into this yellow. I don't know if how well that shows up in the video. Maybe that shows it better, but it has a neat effect. And I think that's gonna look interesting when it dries. And that's part of why we're doing this. And again, we have a similar situation where the orange is bleeding into the yellow. And that's kind of neat. So 4 of these guys, they've kind of come out a little bit differently.